Greetings, welcome, and thanks for joining me. It's Christian of Standing Stones Healing, founder of the Reiki Business Collective, author of Reiki Business Ready, and host of the Build Your Reiki Business podcast. Happy New Year. It is the beginning of a new year. I'm excited to be here with you, and thank you so very much for joining me. But it is not too early to start thinking about your taxes for your Reiki business. Now, I'm going to share with you three big tips for preparing for tax time for your Reiki business. Three things that you really need to pay attention to and know. But isn't it too early to talk about taxes? Here we are at the beginning of January, and taxes aren't due until April 15th, Christian. Well, if you're an S Corp, they are due a little earlier. But what the heck? Why think about taxes right now? Well, as a Reiki business owner, it is really important for us to be ready for tax time. And this is important whether we work with an accountant, a bookkeeper, a tax preparer, or we're doing it all on our own. And so no matter whether we are getting help on our taxes or we are doing them all ourselves, it's very important for us to be aware of the process, to be knowledgeable about how taxes work, and to be ready for tax time, whether we work with someone or not. Now, in this week's episode of the Build Your Reiki Business podcast, I talk all about helping you get ready for tax time, because indeed, April 15th will be here before we know it. And so I offer some tips in that podcast, and I'm going to share three tips with you in this video as well. But I've got the link down below for that podcast episode so that you can tune in to learn more about Reiki business taxes. But first, most importantly, preparing for tax time is a year-round kind of thing. And so on our Reiki business journey, I really want to encourage all of us to be aware of our Reiki business income and expenses at all times, and to not be paying attention to this only at the end of the year or at the beginning of the next year when we say, oh, wait a minute, how much did I make last year? What are my expenses? Darn it, where are those receipts? Do I even have the receipts? But rather that we are paying attention to our income and expenses throughout the whole year, and that we know financially where our Reiki business stands at any point during the year. This is really important because as we approach the end of the year, we may want to make some mindful decisions in our Reiki business about making purchases that we might need to make, so expenses that we might need to make or want to make before the tax year is over, or doing something like making a payment to the IRS, especially if we're not at a point on our Reiki business journey where we are yet making estimated tax payments. And so keeping track of our income and expenses all along throughout the year is going to be really helpful and important for us on our Reiki business journey, especially as we approach the end of the year and the end of a tax year. So very important. Please, if you are not already doing this in your Reiki business, catalog all of your income and expenses as they happen, or at least soon after they happen, so that you have a clear picture of your Reiki business's financial status. So that's number one. Number two, I want to encourage you that if you are new on your Reiki business journey, let's say maybe you've just started accepting payment for your sessions, your products, whatever it might be that you are selling in your Reiki business, it's very important as a US-based Reiki business to make sure that you are keeping track of that income, because once you hit $400 of earnings from your Reiki business, the IRS wants to know, and you need to include that on your yearly taxes as you are filing your own personal taxes. And so once we earn $400 or more in our Reiki business, but once we are at a point where we are earning $400 from our Reiki business activity, we're going to need to inform the IRS of that income, and we're going to need to include that on our taxes. So this is very important. Once you hit $400 or more, the IRS wants to know. Now, if you are in your Reiki business, and let's say that you are just offering sessions here and there, maybe on the weekends to family and friends, and you're accepting some payment and it doesn't add up to $400, then you don't need to include that on your taxes, and you don't need to claim that to the IRS. But that adds up really quickly, right? You know, we have a session here on a weekend that's $50 with our aunt. And then the next weekend, maybe we offer a session for our friend for $30. And then maybe the weekend after that, we do an online distance session that's $70. Hey, that all adds up pretty quickly. And over the course of a year, before we know it, that can easily add up to at least $400. And so this is another reason why it's so important for us to be mindful of our income and expenses throughout the whole year on our Reiki business journey. So number two, once you hit that $400 amount, please do make sure that you are including that on your taxes, because the IRS wants to know. Now, of course, once you hit that $400 mark, that is impacted by expenses as well. That $400 limit is your gross income from Reiki business, and that doesn't include your expenses. And so you may not have to pay taxes on the whole $400 if you have expenses in your Reiki business that reduce that $400 that you would pay taxes on. This is why keeping track of expenses is so important. And number three, if you owe the IRS more than $1,000, you will most likely, not always, there are exceptions to this, but you will most likely end up paying a penalty on that amount, especially if you are brand new on your Reiki business journey and you are not doing things like paying estimated taxes. And so know that if you owe more than $1,000, you may owe a fine, a penalty to the IRS for underpayment, for owing so much money to the IRS. You know, when they owe you more than $1,000, they don't pay you a penalty. They don't pay interest to you or anything like that. But when you owe the IRS more than $1,000, you're probably going to end up having to pay them. Not very fair if you ask me, but them's the rules. And I know the rules because this happened to me at one point many years ago on my Reiki business journey. I ended up owing $1,000. Oops. And that was way before I was paying estimated taxes in my Reiki business. I was new. I didn't know. And I ended up having to pay a penalty. Fortunately, that penalty was only like 26 bucks, but it was enough for me to learn my lesson, and I passed that lesson on to you. And so this is why, another reason why staying on top of our income and expenses throughout the year is very important, so that we know whether or not we might be paying the IRS enough money to, have to pay a penalty, which again, if you are cataloging that all throughout the year, you'll be able to make a payment to the IRS before December 31st and hopefully avoid any kind of penalty. Now, I've got more tips, more information in this week's episode of the podcast. You can always tune in at standingstoneshealing.com/podcast, and the link is below, where you can tune in and listen in on that podcast episode. Now, I also have a class all about Reiki business taxes for US-based Reiki businesses. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, I have no clue what he's talking about. I don't get this at all. I'm so overwhelmed. I'm so freaked out about the taxes thing. Or even, as a matter of fact, I don't want to start my Reiki business because I'm afraid of the taxes thing. You're not alone. You are not alone. And I'm here to help it make sense. I'm here to help you understand. I'm here to walk you through it. And I'm here to help you not feel quite so overwhelmed. I explain how taxes work for US based Reiki businesses in my tax class. You can learn more and you can start right now at standingstoneshealing.com/tax class. I'll drop that link down below as well. Now, of course, I am not an accountant. I am not a tax preparer. I am not a tax lawyer. I am not a bookkeeper. I am not your tax preparer, but I do know a thing or two about Reiki business taxes, and I share that information with you in the Reiki Business Tax class at standingstoneshealing.com/tax class. I'm sending so many blessings and best wishes to your Reiki business and to your Reiki business taxes. No, as a US based Reiki business, it is not too early to be prepared for tax time. Sending lots of blessings and best wishes to your Reiki business.